The dust swirled like angry spirits around her bare feet as Hope Patterson stumbled down the middle of the dirt road, her toes bleeding and her throat parched from thirst. It was the summer of 1875, and the unforgiving Idaho sun beat down on her shoulders with merciless intensity. Her cotton dress, once white, but now stained with dirt and sweat, hung loosely on her thin frame, torn at the hem from her desperate flight through the wilderness. Ethan Warren spotted her from a quarter-mile away, the lone figure wavering in the heat haze like a mirage. He pulled gently on his horse's reins, slowing the dappled gray stallion to a walk as he approached. The woman looked half dead, her long auburn hair matted and wild, her skin sunburned and her eyes glazed with exhaustion. "Where are you going?" he called out, tipping his hat back to reveal concerned blue eyes. Hope stopped, swaying slightly as she looked up at the cowboy. His broad shoulders blocked the sun, casting her in momentary shadow. She tried to speak, but her dry lips cracked painfully, and no sound emerged. Then, without warning, her knees buckled beneath her. Ethan swung down from his saddle in one fluid motion, catching her before she hit the ground. She felt as light as a child in his arms, her skin burning with fever. "Easy now, madam," he said, cradling her against his chest. "You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises the color of spring violets. "They're coming," she whispered before slipping into unconsciousness. Ethan looked down the empty road stretching behind her. Whoever they were, there was no sign of them yet. With practiced ease, he lifted the unconscious woman onto his horse, then mounted behind her, keeping one arm secured around her waist as he urged his mount toward Malad City. The small settlement was just 3 miles ahead, and she needed water, food, and medical attention fast. The town of Malad City had grown in recent years, boasting a general store, a small hotel, a saloon, and most importantly, a doctor's office. Dr. Franklin had been treating the townsfolk and surrounding ranchers for 15 years now, ever since he'd moved west following the Civil War. Ethan rode straight to the doctor's whitewashed cabin at the edge of town, ignoring the curious stares of the locals. A woman walking barefoot down the road wasn't a common sight, even in these parts. "Doc," he called out, dismounting carefully while still supporting Hope. "Need your help out here." The door swung open and Dr. Franklin appeared, his silver spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "What's this now?" Ethan found her walking on the road toward town. "Passed out from heat and exhaustion, I reckon. Maybe worse." The doctor's weathered face creased with concern as he helped Ethan carry Hope inside. "Bring her to the examination room. Mrs. Franklin," he called to his wife, "fetch some cool water and clean cloths." They laid Hope on the narrow bed, and Ethan stepped back, removing his hat as the doctor began his examination. Mrs. Franklin hurried in with a basin of water and clean linens, then shooed Ethan out to the waiting room. "This is women's business now, Mr. Warren. You go on and wait outside." Ethan paced the small waiting area, occasionally glancing out the window toward the road leading into town. Hope's words, "they're coming," had left him uneasy. After an hour, Dr. Franklin emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. "She'll live," he said simply. "Severe dehydration, cuts and bruises on her feet, exhaustion. But there's something else, Ethan." The cowboy straightened. "What is it, Doc?" "There are rope burns on her wrists and bruises, the kind that come from being handled roughly." The doctor's expression darkened. "I believe someone held this young woman against her will." Ethan's jaw tightened. At 32, he'd seen enough of the world's cruelty to recognize its patterns. "Any idea who she is?" "None. My wife found this in her dress pocket, though." The doctor handed over a small, crumpled piece of paper. Ethan carefully unfolded it, Written in shaky handwriting was a simple message. Malad City finds Sheriff Doyle. Our sheriff, Ethan frowned. She came here looking for him, seems that way. Dr. Franklin sighed. She needs rest now. My wife will stay with her. Perhaps you should ride over and fetch Sheriff Doyle. Ethan nodded, settling his hat back on his head. I'll do that. And Doc, don't tell anyone else about her just yet. The doctor gave him a knowing look. I've been practicing medicine long enough to understand discretion, young man. Sheriff James Doyle was a hulking man with a thick mustache and an even thicker accent that betrayed his Irish roots. He'd been keeping the peace in Malad City for 8 years, earning respect for his fairness and unwavering courage. When Ethan found him at his office, the sheriff was cleaning his revolver, a daily ritual he claimed kept both the weapon and his mind sharp. A woman, you say, looking for me. The sheriff frowned, replacing his gun in its holster. And you found her on the road to town? Yes, sir, barefoot and half dead from the heat. Any idea who she is? None. She's at Doc Franklin's now, unconscious, but she had this. Ethan handed over the note. Sheriff Doyle studied it, his expression unreadable. My handwriting, he confirmed. Though I've given notes like this to dozens of people over the years, anyone who might need help could find me here. She said they're coming before she passed out. The sheriff's head snapped up. Those were her exact words. Ethan nodded, noticing how the older man's hand moved instinctively to rest on his gun belt. I think we'd best get back to Doc's place, Sheriff Doyle said, rising to his feet. And I'll send word to my deputies to keep an eye on the roads into town. They rode back to the doctor's house in silence, the sheriff lost in thought, and Ethan wondering what kind of trouble had found its way to their quiet town. As they approached, Dr. Franklin's wife met them at the door, her normally calm demeanor visibly shaken. She's awake, she said, and asking for the sheriff. Hope was sitting up in bed, a quilt drawn around her shoulders despite the summer heat. Her face was pale beneath her sunburn, but her eyes were clear and alert now. When the sheriff entered, recognition flickered across her features. Sheriff Doyle, she said, her voice stronger than Ethan would have expected. Thank God. I'm here, miss, the sheriff said gently, though I'm afraid I don't recall making your acquaintance. You wouldn't. You knew my father, Thomas Patterson. He was a U.S. Marshal. The sheriff's eyes widened. Tom Patterson. He saved my life during that business with the Carter gang back in '68. Hope nodded. He spoke highly of you, said if I ever needed help and he wasn't around, I should find Sheriff Doyle in Malad City, Idaho. And where is your father now, Miss Patterson? Her eyes dropped to her hands, which were twisting the edge of the quilt. Dead. 3 weeks ago. They shot him in our home, then took me. Ethan felt a cold anger settle in his chest. The sheriff's expression hardened. Who took you, Miss Patterson? The Blackwater Gang. Adam Reed and his brothers. Her voice trembled slightly. They wanted information about a gold shipment my father was supposed to guard. When I couldn't tell them anything useful, She swallowed hard. They decided to take me to their boss, a man named Victor Sloan. The sheriff exchanged a glance with Ethan. Sloan was infamous throughout the territory, a businessman on the surface, but rumored to control most of the illegal activities from Idaho down to Nevada. How did you escape? Ethan asked. Hope's eyes met his for the first time since she'd awakened. We stopped to make camp about 15 miles from here. They'd been drinking. The one guarding me fell asleep. I managed to get his knife and cut my ropes. Her hands unconsciously rubbed at her wrists. I took off into the night. I've been walking ever since, staying off the main trails when I could. Until today, Ethan said softly. She nodded. I couldn't go any further through the brush, my feet. She looked down at her bandaged feet with a grimace. You're safe now, Sheriff Doyle assured her. But if the Blackwater Gang is after you, we need to be prepared. They're not known for giving up easily. Or for leaving witnesses, Hope added grimly. I'll post guards around town, the sheriff decided. Ethan, can I count on you and some of the other ranchers? Of course, Sheriff. He'd already been mentally assembling a group of men he trusted, hard-working cowboys who wouldn't shy away from trouble. Miss Patterson needs more rest, Mrs. Franklin interrupted. You men can discuss your plans elsewhere. As they turned to leave, Hope called out, Wait, her eyes found Ethan's again. You're the one who found me on the road, aren't you? He nodded. Ethan Warren, madam. I own the Triple W Ranch just outside town. Thank you, Mr. Warren. I would have died out there if not for you. Something in the way she looked at him, vulnerable yet determined, stirred a protective instinct Ethan hadn't felt in years. Just glad I was passing by, Miss Patterson. Outside, the sheriff laid out his plan. 2 deputies would patrol the town boundaries, while Ethan and 3 other trusted men would take shifts watching the doctor's house. Meanwhile, Sheriff Doyle would telegraph the federal marshal's office in Boise for reinforcements. These men won't be expecting resistance, the sheriff explained. They'll be looking for a lone woman on foot, not an armed posse. What if they don't come? Ethan asked. The sheriff's expression was grim. They'll come. Men like that don't leave loose ends. That night, Ethan took the first watch outside the doctor's house, his Winchester rifle across his lap as he sat on the porch. The summer night was peaceful, with a chorus of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Through the window, he could see the soft glow of a lamp in Hope's room. Around midnight, the door opened quietly, and she stepped out onto the porch. She'd been given a clean dress that belonged to Mrs. Franklin, though it hung loosely on her slender frame. Her feet were wrapped in bandages, but she moved with more strength than earlier. You should be resting, Miss Patterson, Ethan said, rising from his chair. I've been resting all day, she replied, lowering herself carefully into the rocking chair beside him. And please call me Hope. Hope, he repeated, finding that the name suited her. Despite everything she'd been through, there was an undeniable resilience about her. It's a beautiful night, she observed, looking up at the star-filled sky. I didn't appreciate such things when I was their prisoner. Ethan nodded, understanding how captivity changed a person's perspective. He'd spent 6 months in a Confederate prison during the war, and he still woke sometimes in the night, grateful for the simple freedom of open space. Have you lived in Malad City long, Mr. Warren? Call me Ethan, he said. And yes, about 7 years now. Came west after the war, worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to buy my own place. The Triple W, she remembered. That's right. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine, free and clear. Hope smiled, and even in the dim light, Ethan could see how it transformed her face. My father always wanted a ranch. He talked about retiring from the marshal service, raising horses somewhere quiet. He never got the chance, Ethan said softly. No, her smile faded. He was a good man. He didn't deserve to die like that. Few do. Ethan hesitated, then added, I lost my parents during the war. Fever took them both within a week of each other. Hope's eyes met his, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. I'm sorry, she said simply. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the gentle creaking of Hope's rocking chair blending with the night sounds. Eventually, she spoke again. What will happen when they come? Ethan didn't pretend to misunderstand. The sheriff has a good plan. We'll be ready for them. They're dangerous men, Ethan. So are we, he replied with quiet confidence. This is our town. We protect our own. Hope looked at him curiously. Is that what I am, one of your own? You don't even know me. Ethan considered this. I know enough, he said finally. I know you survived when many wouldn't have. I know you're brave enough to sit here talking about your pursuers instead of hiding under the covers. That tells me more about you than a formal introduction ever could." Her cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "Thank you for saying that and for everything." Before he could respond, a flicker of movement at the edge of town caught his attention. Ethan stood slowly, moving Hope behind him with one hand while raising his rifle with the other. "Get inside," he whispered. "Now." But it was only Sheriff Doyle returning from his rounds. Ethan lowered his rifle, exhaling slowly. "Jumpy, aren't we?" the sheriff commented as he approached. "Good, keeps a man alive." He tipped his hat to Hope. "Miss Patterson, feeling better, I see." "Yes, Sheriff, thank you." "Any sign of trouble?" Ethan asked. "Nothing yet, but Tom Riley's keeping watch on the North Road. Says he spotted dust about 5 miles out just before sunset. Could be nothing, could be something." Hope shivered despite the warm night air. "I should go back inside." Ethan nodded. "I'll stay on watch." After she'd gone, Sheriff Doyle sat in the chair Hope had vacated. "She's a strong one," he observed. Tom Patterson raised her right. "You think they'll attack tonight?" The sheriff shook his head. "No, they'll scout first, try to figure out if she's really here. Might take a day or two before they make their move." But Sheriff Doyle was wrong. The attack came at dawn. The first shots woke Ethan from a light doze. He jumped to his feet as Sheriff Doyle burst from the house, buckling on his gun belt. "They're at the north end of town," the sheriff shouted. At least 5 riders. Ethan's deputy, young Billy Sutter, came running down the street. "Sheriff, they set fire to the livery stable as a distraction. Damn it, Ethan, stay with Hope. Billy, round up the others and get that fire under control." As the sheriff ran toward the sound of gunfire, Ethan entered the house to find Hope already dressed, her face pale but determined. "We need to move you," he said, checking the ammunition in his revolver. "They're creating chaos to draw us out." "Where can we go?" she asked. Ethan thought quickly. "My ranch. It's defensible and they won't expect us to leave town." Dr. Franklin appeared from the back room. "My wife's hitching up our buggy now. You can take it." "Thank you, Doc." Ethan turned to Hope. "Can you ride in your condition?" She managed a tense smile. "Watch me." They slipped out the back door to where Mrs. Franklin waited with a small, covered buggy. "Be careful," the doctor's wife said, pressing a bundle of food and medical supplies into Hope's hands. "Head south out of town," Ethan instructed as he helped Hope into the buggy. "Follow the creek for about 3 miles, then cut west at the big cottonwood. My ranch is just beyond the ridge. You're not coming with me. I need to help the sheriff first. Buy you some time." Seeing the concern in her eyes, he added, "I'll be right behind you, I promise." Hope gripped his arm. "Be careful, Ethan." He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. "I will. Now go." As the buggy pulled away, Ethan checked his weapons one last time, then headed toward the gunfire at the north end of town. The scene was chaos, the livery stable engulfed in flames. Townsfolk forming a bucket brigade while others took cover from the sporadic gunfire coming from riders at the edge of town. Sheriff Doyle was crouched behind a water trough, exchanging shots with 2 men on horseback who were using the smoke from the fire as partial cover. 3 more circled around the back of town, the sheriff reported as Ethan joined him. "These 2 are just keeping us busy." "Hope's headed to my ranch," Ethan said. "Safer there than here." "Good thinking. We need to end this quick, then get after her before—" The sheriff's words were cut off by a barrage of gunfire that splintered the wood around them. "On 3, Ethan said, nodding toward positions that would give them crossfire on the gunmen. 1, 2, 3, they broke cover simultaneously, each taking aim at a different rider. Ethan's shot found its mark, sending one man tumbling from his saddle with a cry. The sheriff's target wheeled his horse around and galloped away, shouting to unseen companions. "They're retreating," Sheriff Doyle said, but his expression remained grim. Too easily. Ethan felt cold realization wash over him. The others, they must have spotted Hope leaving. Without another word, both men ran for their horses. They rode hard out of town, following the southern road. The buggy had left clear tracks in the dusty soil, making it easy to follow too easy. There. Sheriff Doyle pointed to where 3 riders were visible in the distance, gaining on a small buggy. Ethan spurred his horse to a gallop, outdistancing the sheriff as they raced to intercept. He could see Hope now, looking over her shoulder at her pursuers, urging the horse pulling the buggy to greater speed. But the laden vehicle was no match for the mounted men. As the distance closed, Ethan pulled his rifle from its scabbard and took careful aim despite the jolting ride. His first shot missed, but the second struck one of the pursuers in the shoulder, knocking him from his horse. The other 2 split up, one continuing after Hope while the other turned to face Ethan, firing wildly in his direction. Ethan ducked low over his horse's neck, then returned fire with more precision. The man jerked in his saddle but stayed mounted, retreating toward his fallen companion. Ahead, the remaining rider had nearly reached the buggy. Hope was desperately trying to control the panicked horse while looking for a weapon. As the rider pulled alongside, reaching for the reins, Hope swung the heavy medical bag with all her might, catching him in the face. He reeled back but maintained his seat, drawing his gun. Ethan was still too far away. In desperation, he fired again, knowing the shot was risky at this range. By some miracle, or perhaps the steady hand that had won him shooting contests across 3 territories, the bullet found its target. The outlaw clutched his chest, slumped forward, then fell heavily to the ground. By the time Ethan reached the buggy, Hope had managed to bring the horse under control. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, but her eyes were clear and focused. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, scanning her for injuries. "No," she managed, her voice shaking slightly. "But it was close." Sheriff Doyle arrived moments later, immediately checking the fallen outlaw. "Dead," he confirmed. "Looks like one of the Reid brothers." "The other 2 were retreating last I saw," Ethan said, still watching Hope with concern. "They'll be back," Hope said quietly, "with more men." The sheriff nodded grimly. "She's right. This was just the first attempt. We need to get her somewhere safe until the federal marshals arrive." "My ranch stands," Ethan insisted. "It's defensible and they won't expect her to be outside of town." After a moment's consideration, Sheriff Doyle agreed. "I'll go back to town, telegraph for more help, then join you with as many men as I can gather. 2-3 hours at most." As the sheriff rode back toward town, Ethan transferred Hope to his own horse, abandoning the slow buggy. She sat in front of him, her body tense but steady against his chest as they rode. The Triple W Ranch came into view. As they crested a small ridge, a sturdy 2-story house built of pine logs, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings, all nestled in a small valley with a creek running behind the property. It wasn't grand, but it was well maintained and, as Ethan had said, defensible. 2 ranch hands came running as they approached, alerted by the sound of hoofbeats. "Boss, what's happened?" called Miguel Vasquez, Ethan's foreman for the past 5 years. "Trouble's coming," Ethan replied, helping Hope dismount. "The Blackwater Gang. Miguel, this is Miss Hope Patterson. She's under our protection." The foreman nodded respectfully to Hope, then turned serious eyes to Ethan. "How many men?" "At least 3, maybe more by now." "Sheriff Doyle is bringing reinforcements, but we need to prepare." As Miguel hurried to alert the other hands, Ethan led Hope into the house. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Hope glanced around, noting the lack of feminine touches. "You live alone?" she asked. "Just me and the ranch hands," Ethan confirmed, checking that the windows were secure. "Never found the time for other arrangements." Hope nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. In this territory, many men lived solitary lives, too busy carving out an existence from the wilderness to pursue family life. "You should rest while you can," he suggested, showing her to a bedroom upstairs. "I need to organize our defenses." Hope sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. "They won't stop, you know, not until they find me." Ethan paused at the door, his expression resolute. "Then we'll just have to make sure they regret finding you." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as Ethan and his men prepared for the coming attack. Rifles and ammunition were distributed, water barrels filled in case of fire. Horses moved to the back corral where they'd be safer from stray bullets. By mid-afternoon, they had transformed the peaceful ranch into a fortified position. Hope insisted on helping, preparing food for the men and tearing strips of cloth for bandages. Ethan was impressed by her composure. Many women would have been overcome by hysteria after what she'd experienced, but Hope worked methodically, her movements efficient despite her injured feet. "You've done this before," he observed as she checked the loading of a shotgun with practiced ease. "My father believed a woman should know how to defend herself," she replied. "He taught me to shoot when I was 12. He sounds like a wise man." He was. Her expression softened with grief. "He would have liked you, I think." Before Ethan could respond, Miguel appeared at the door. "Riders coming, boss, but it's Sheriff Doyle with 6 men." The reinforcements were a welcome sight, 6 capable men from town, all armed and ready. The sheriff had also brought news. "Telegraph came in from the federal marshal's office just before we left," he told Ethan and Hope as they gathered in the main room of the house. "They're sending a special deputy, should be here by tomorrow noon." "Will we last that long?" one of the townsmen asked nervously. "We'll last," Ethan said firmly. "This is my land. No gang of outlaws is going to take it or anyone under my protection." Hope met his eyes across the room, a silent understanding passing between them. In the short time they'd known each other, a bond had formed, forged in danger perhaps, but no less real for that. As dusk approached, Miguel spotted dust on the horizon. "Riders coming. At least 8, maybe more." "This is it," Sheriff Doyle said grimly. "Everyone to your positions." The defenders had been strategically placed, 2 men in the barn loft, 3 in the main house, the rest distributed among outbuildings and natural cover. Hope, despite her protests, had been assigned to stay in the house with Ethan and the sheriff. "I can shoot," she'd argued. "I don't doubt it," Ethan had replied. "But you can also reload for us, which doubles our effectiveness." As the riders approached, they slowed, clearly assessing the situation. At their head was a tall man with a silver-streaked beard, Victor Sloan himself, come to retrieve his prize. "Warren," he called out, stopping his men just beyond easy rifle range. "We don't want trouble with you. Just give us the girl and we'll be on our way." "The lady isn't going anywhere with you, Sloan," Sheriff Doyle shouted back. "This is official law enforcement business now." "Turn around and ride out while you still can," Sloan laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the evening air. "I don't see any federal badges, Sheriff. Just you and a bunch of cowboys and shopkeepers. Last chance, give us the girl, or we burn this place to the ground with all of you in it." "He's stalling," Hope said suddenly, peering out the window. "Look, they're spreading out." She was right. While Sloan kept them talking, his men were fanning out, seeking positions to surround the ranch. "Take the shot, Sheriff," Ethan urged, "before they get set." The sheriff raised his rifle, took careful aim, and fired. Sloan's hat flew from his head, and the outlaw leader ducked, cursing loudly. "Kill them all!" he roared, spurring his horse toward the cover of a nearby stand of trees. The battle erupted in earnest then, gunfire erupting from multiple directions as Sloane's men sought to overwhelm the defenders with sheer firepower. But Ethan's planning paid off. The ranch buildings provided excellent cover, and his men held their positions, returning measured, accurate fire. 2 of Sloane's men fell in the first exchange, but the others pressed forward, using the gathering darkness to their advantage. One outlaw made it to the barn and tossed a flaming torch onto the roof. The dry wood caught quickly, sending up a plume of smoke and flame. "The horses!" Hope cried, starting for the door. Ethan caught her arm. "Miguel will handle it. Stay here." True to his word, the foreman and another hand were already leading the panicked horses from the barn to the safety of the back corral, even as they dodged bullets. The firefight continued as night fell completely, the burning barn providing sinister illumination. One of the townsmen took a bullet in the shoulder but insisted on continuing to fight. Another, positioned in the bunkhouse, killed an outlaw who tried to rush the building. Inside the main house, Hope moved between the windows, reloading rifles and passing them back to Ethan and the sheriff. The constant crack of gunfire was deafening, but she worked steadily, her face set in determined lines. "They're pulling back," Sheriff Doyle observed after nearly an hour of fighting. "Regrouping, or setting up for something worse," Ethan said grimly. He was right. Minutes later, Sloane's voice rang out again. "Last chance, Warren. Send out the Patterson woman, or we rush the house with everything we've got." Hope's hand stilled on the rifle she was reloading. "Maybe I should go," she whispered. "I can't be responsible for all of you dying." Ethan turned to her, his expression fierce. "That's not happening. No one here is dying for you, we're fighting with you. There's a difference." The sheriff nodded his agreement. "He's right, Miss Patterson, we stand together." Before Hope could respond, a new sound cut through the night, the rhythmic drumming of many horses' hooves, approaching fast from the direction of town. "More of Sloane's men?" she asked fearfully. Ethan moved to the window, peering into the darkness. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "No. That's a cavalry formation." Moments later, a voice called out authoritative, commanding. "This is Captain James Harrington, United States Cavalry. All civilians identify yourselves." Sheriff Doyle rushed to the door. "Sheriff Doyle of Malad City here, Captain. We have outlaws surrounding the ranch." The arrival of 20 cavalry troopers changed the tide instantly. Sloane and his remaining men, caught in the open between the ranch and the new arrivals, surrendered rather than face the disciplined firepower of the soldiers. As the soldiers secured the prisoners, a tall man in civilian clothes but wearing a federal marshal's badge approached the house. "I'm looking for Hope Patterson," he announced. Hope stepped forward. "I'm Hope Patterson." The marshal removed his hat. "Deputy Marshal Richard Daniels, miss. I knew your father. When we received the telegraph about your situation, I was already in the area with the cavalry unit. We rode straight through to get here." Relief washed over Hope in a wave so powerful that her knees nearly buckled. Ethan's hand steadied her elbow, his touch gentle but firm, a touch she had come to recognize and rely upon in the short time she'd known him. "Thank you, Marshal," she managed. "And thank you, Captain," she added to the cavalry officer who had joined them. Captain Harrington bowed slightly. "Just doing our duty, madam. These men have been terrorizing the territory for months. We're glad to finally have them in custody." "What will happen to them?" Ethan asked. "Sloane and the surviving Reed brother will hang," Marshal Daniels said bluntly. "The others will face prison." "And Miss Patterson," he turned to Hope, "will need your testimony, of course." "Of course," she agreed. "Whatever it takes to see justice done for my father." The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. The cavalry set up camp near the ranch, the injured were treated, and statements were taken from all involved. The barn had been badly damaged by fire but was still standing. The rest of the ranch had escaped serious harm. As dawn broke, Hope found herself sitting on the porch of Ethan's house, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer morning's warmth. She felt empty, drained, the adrenaline and fear that had sustained her for days finally ebbing away, leaving exhaustion in their wake. Ethan joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "You should be sleeping," he said softly. "I tried. Every time I close my eyes, I see them coming for me again." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "What happens now?" "Marshal Daniels says they'll escort the prisoners to Boise for trial. He'd like you to go along, give your testimony." Hope nodded. She had expected as much. "And after that?" Ethan hesitated. "What do you want to happen after that?" She looked out over the ranch, the valley now peaceful in the morning light. The damaged barn, the signs of the firefight, all would be repaired in time. Life would go on. But for her, there was no going back. "I don't know," she admitted. "My father's house in Montana, I can't go back there, too many memories." "You could stay," Ethan said quietly, "here in Malad City." Hope glanced at him, surprised. "Here, it's a good town, good people. You've seen that firsthand." He paused, then added more softly, "And I'd be nearby if you ever needed anything." Something in his tone made Hope study him more carefully. Ethan Warren was not a man who spoke his feelings easily, she had gathered. This careful offer was, perhaps, as close as he could come to saying what was truly in his heart. "I think I'd like that," she said finally. "To stay, at least for a while." The smile that lit his face confirmed what she had suspected, that his interest in her went beyond mere protection or duty. And if she were honest with herself, she felt the same stirring of something deeper than gratitude when she looked at him. "I should warn you," she added with the ghost of a smile. "I know nothing about ranching." "I'm a patient teacher," he replied, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. 3 days later, Hope left for Boise with Marshal Daniels and the cavalry escort. Ethan rode with them as far as the territorial border, reluctant to see her go even for a short time. They had spent those 3 days in each other's company almost constantly, talking, sharing meals, beginning to know one another beyond the crisis that had brought them together. "I'll be back in 2 weeks, Hope promised as they said goodbye. "Less if I can manage it." "I'll be waiting," Ethan replied simply. The trial was swift and decisive. Victor Sloan and Jacob Reed were sentenced to hang for multiple murders, including that of U.S. Marshal Thomas Patterson. The other surviving gang members received long prison sentences. Hope's testimony was crucial, but the ordeal left her drained and haunted by memories. True to her word, she returned to Malad City 12 days after leaving. Ethan was waiting at the stagecoach stop, his normally composed face unable to hide his pleasure at seeing her again. "Welcome back," he said, helping her down from the coach. Hope smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders at the sight of him. "It's good to be back." She had made arrangements to stay at the small hotel in town while she decided on more permanent accommodations. Ethan escorted her there, carrying her single bag. "How's the ranch?" she asked as they walked. "Good. The barn's almost repaired. Miguel says the new roof is better than the old one." "And your hands, no lasting injuries, all recovered?" He hesitated. "And you, how are you really?" Hope appreciated that he asked the question directly without platitudes. "Better," she said honestly. "Having the trial concluded helps, knowing they can't hurt anyone else." They reached the hotel, but neither seemed eager to end their conversation. Finally, Ethan said, "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tomorrow night, to celebrate your return." "I'd like that very much," Hope replied, feeling a pleasant warmth spread through her chest. Over the following weeks, Hope settled into life in Malad City. Using money inherited from her father, she purchased a small house on the edge of town. She took a position as an assistant at the town's small school, discovering a talent for teaching that surprised and delighted her. And she spent time with Ethan riding on his land, sharing meals, talking for hours. He was a man of few words by nature, but with her, he found himself opening up, sharing stories of his life before and during the war, his dreams for the ranch, his hopes for the future. By autumn, their courtship was the talk of the town, though conducted with proper decorum. Sheriff Doyle, who had appointed himself something of a guardian to Hope in her father's absence, heartily approved of the match. "Ethan Warren's one of the finest men I know," he told Hope one afternoon as they sat on the porch of her new home. "Your father would have liked him." "I know," Hope agreed, smiling at the thought. "Though he would have made Ethan work to prove himself worthy, I'm sure." The sheriff chuckled. "No doubt, but Ethan would have been up to the challenge." On a crisp October evening, Ethan took Hope riding to a hilltop overlooking his ranch. The valley below was painted in autumn colors, the rebuilt barn standing proud among the other buildings. "I come here sometimes to think," Ethan said as they dismounted, "to remember why I work so hard." Hope stood beside him, drinking in the view. "It's beautiful." Yes, but he wasn't looking at the landscape. His eyes were on her face, watching how the setting sun gilded her auburn hair with fire, how her eyes reflected the vast sky. "Hope," he said softly, taking her hands in his. "When I found you on that road, barefoot and desperate, I had no idea how completely you would change my life." She squeezed his hands, encouraging him to continue. "I've lived alone for a long time, built this ranch, worked the land, never felt I was missing anything." He took a deep breath. "But now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Hope's heart quickened. "Ethan, I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures," he continued. "But I love you, Hope Patterson, with everything I am. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Hope's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes, Ethan." He pulled her into his arms then, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them for months. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I should warn you," Ethan said, his voice husky. "Ranching is a hard life. There will be difficult times." Hope smiled up at him. "I've faced outlaws and testified against murderers. I think I can handle a few unruly cattle." He laughed, the sound echoing across the hilltop. "I don't doubt it for a moment." They were married in December in the small church in Malad City. The town turned out in force for the celebration. Sheriff Doyle gave the bride away, Dr. and Mrs. Franklin beamed from the front pew, and Miguel served as Ethan's best man. Marshal Daniels made the journey from Boise for the occasion, bringing a letter that had been found among Victor Sloan's possessions after his execution, a letter from Thomas Patterson, written shortly before his death, warning federal authorities about Sloan's operations. It had never been delivered, intercepted by one of Sloan's corrupt contacts in the Postal Service. "Your father died trying to bring Sloan to justice," the marshal told Hope. "He would be proud to know his daughter finished what he started." The wedding feast was held at the Triple W Ranch, the main house decorated with pine boughs and winter berries. As the evening progressed, Ethan led his bride outside, away from the music and laughter, to a moment of privacy beneath the star-filled winter sky. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. "More than I ever thought possible," Hope replied honestly. "When I was walking down that road, barefoot and afraid, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I was actually walking toward my future." "Our future," Ethan corrected gently. And it's just beginning. In the spring, they built an addition to the ranch house, a study for Hope, filled with books and a desk where she could continue her writing. For she had discovered another talent during the quiet winter evenings, penning stories that Ethan encouraged her to submit to publishers back east. Summer brought the news that they were expecting their first child, a joyful announcement that was celebrated throughout the ranch and town. Hope's pregnancy didn't slow her down much. She continued to help with the lighter ranch duties and to write her stories, now with even more purpose. "Our child will grow up surrounded by your words," Ethan told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "What a gift that will be." Their son was born the following winter, Thomas Warren, named for Hope's father. He arrived during a rare Idaho snowstorm, Dr. Franklin making it to the ranch just in time for the delivery. The boy had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cry. As Hope cradled their newborn son, with Ethan sitting beside her on the bed, his arm protectively around them both, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. "If you hadn't been riding that road that day," she said softly, "if you hadn't stopped and asked where I was going, I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Ethan replied, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "Some things are meant to be." Over the years, the Triple W Ranch prospered under Ethan's careful management. Hope's stories gained popularity, published regularly in magazines and eventually collected in a book. They added to their family a daughter, Sarah, joined them 2 years after Thomas, followed by another son, James, 3 years later. Malad City grew as well, the railroad finally reaching it in 1889. Sheriff Doyle retired but remained a frequent visitor to the ranch, delighting in telling the Warren children stories of their parents' dramatic meeting and courtship. "Your mama was the bravest woman I ever saw," he would say. "And your papa, he knew the minute he laid eyes on her that she was something special." On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Hope back to the spot where he had proposed. The view had changed somewhat. The ranch was larger now, with more buildings and expanded corrals. But the essence remained the same. A home they had built together, a life shared in all its joys and sorrows. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, his hair now streaked with silver but his blue eyes as clear and direct as ever. Hope leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "Only that my father never got to see this, to see us, our children, what we've built. He knows," Ethan said with quiet certainty. "Wherever he is, he knows his daughter found her way home." Hope smiled, thinking of the barefoot, desperate young woman she had been, walking down a dusty road toward an unknown future. That road had led her here, to love, to family, to purpose, to Ethan. "Yes," she agreed, turning her face up to his. "I found my way home." As the sun set over their land, Ethan drew his wife into his arms and kissed her, still marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them together, a desperate woman, a lonely rancher, and a simple question asked on a summer day. "Where are you going?" The answer, it turned out, had always been, "To you. I was always going to you."